Hello and welcome to History for Sleep Better. Tonight we travel across the silent steppes to meet Temüjin, the boy who became Genghis Khan. Breathe slowly as campfires glow, horse bells fade, and a vast empire gathers like clouds before dawn. We'll follow his path from broken alliances to a unifying vision. Maps unfolding like blankets. No rush, no noise, only clear footsteps through time. Rest your eyes. Let the wind carry the tale. When morning comes, you'll remember the journey, not the wait. Dream of banners rising and hoofbeats away. Let questions settle like snow upon the plain.
As the night gently descends and your mind prepares for rest, I invite you on a serene journey through the vast passes of Mongolia, where history wove an immense and profound tapestry. Imagine a time when the largest contiguous land empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, a realm whose saga was not only about conquest, but about an extraordinary cultural exchange, innovation, and trade networks that connected East and West centuries before our modern era. Close your eyes and let your thoughts lead you towards those wind-swept prairies, where a Borgian boy named Temüjin was born, clutching a clot of blood, an omen. From poverty, he would ascend to become Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. Breathe deeply as we witness the birth of an empire that would forever change the course of human history. If you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to the page. Thank you. On the rugged plateau of Mongolia, around the year 1152, a child first saw the light of day. He was the son of Yurts, a minor chief of the Borgian clan, and his wife Holan. They named him Temüjin, in honor of a Tatar chief his father had captured. Mongolia at that time was not a unified nation, but a mosaic of nomadic tribes: Tatars, Merkits, Nayman, Karite, and dozens of others, locked in constant cycles of raiding, alliances, and betrayals. Life on the steppes was brutally difficult. Winters brought temperatures plummeting to 40 degrees below zero, while summer droughts could decimate the herds upon which their survival depended. In this unforgiving landscape, only the strongest and most adaptable survived. For his earliest days, Temüjin learned the skills of the nomadic warrior, riding at a gallop before he could walk, shooting a bow from horseback with deadly precision, and enduring days without food or shelter. But even by the harsh standards of steppe life, this boy's childhood would prove exceptionally difficult. When he was only 9 years old, his father took him to the family of his promised bride, Borte, leaving him there to be raised by his future in-laws, as was the Mongol custom. On his journey back home, Yurts accepted food from some Tatars, who recognized him as an enemy and poisoned him. As he lay dying, Yurts sent a trusted companion to retrieve his son and bring him back to the family. Upon the father's death, clan members abandoned Temüjin's family, refusing to be led by a child. The deepest water dries up, the brightest stone crumbles, they told his mother, taking away even the ancestral herds, the family's only remaining source of sustenance. Left without protection or resources, the widow and her children were forced to survive by foraging for berries and roots and hunting small game, living as outcasts on the fringes of tribal society. An old Mongol proverb states, "When a master dies, the servants scatter like smoke. When the mother tree falls, the young saplings cannot stand alone." And so it seemed for this abandoned family. This period of devastating poverty forged Temüjin's character. With his mother and siblings, he learned to hunt marmots and fish, to sew clothes from the skins of field mice, and to find strength in family loyalty when all external support had vanished. His resilient mother taught her children that their only hope for survival lay in perfect unity. Together, you can resist any enemy, but a single arrow breaks easily. Yet, tragedy continued to haunt the boy. When he was about 12, he murdered his half-brother Bektor in a dispute over hunting spoils, establishing his dominance within the family, but living with the grave consequences of fratricide, one of the most serious crimes in Mongol society. Soon after this incident, disaster struck again. The Taishid clan, once followers of his father, captured Temüjin and kept him in a wooden collar designed for slaves. For days he was paraded from yurt to yurt as an object of curiosity and derision. But one night, seeing his guards distracted during a celebration, the prisoner smashed his wooden collar against a rock and fled into the night. A Taishid pursuer spotted him hiding in the shallow waters of a river, but inexplicably chose not to reveal his location. This mysterious act of mercy would be long remembered by Temüjin, who later rewarded the man, named Sorkin Shira, when he came to power. Even in these darkest moments, the future ruler was learning what acts of kindness and cruelty would shape his leadership. After escaping captivity, he reunited with his family and soon sought out his promised bride. Their marriage created an alliance with her tribe, the Anggerat, giving him his first political connection and the start of a power base. As a wedding gift, he received a magnificent black sable coat, a treasure he would soon use strategically. Understanding that on the steps a man without allies was a man waiting for death, Temüjin traveled to find Togrul, the Khan of the Karite and a blood brother of his late father. Presenting the precious sable coat as a gift, the young leader secured Togrul's promise of support, famously declaring, "I shall be your right hand, and together we shall unite the felt-tinted peoples." This alliance proved timely. Shortly after his marriage, warriors from the Merkit tribe, enemies of his father who had once kidnapped his mother, raided his encampment and captured his new wife. For revenge, with the support of the Karite Khan and the assistance of his childhood friend and future rival, Jamuka, Temüjin launched his first military campaign, successfully rescuing her. Borte's return was joyful, but complicated. She was pregnant, and the child, Joki, would forever carry the stigma of uncertain paternity. Yet, Temüjin claimed the boy as his own, demonstrating a pragmatism regarding family and loyalty that would later extend to his empire building. For him, competence and loyalty would be more important than birth or background, a revolutionary concept in deeply hierarchical tribal society. Following the campaign against the Merkit, Temüjin's reputation grew. He demonstrated an unprecedented ability to attract followers not through tribal connections, but through personal loyalty. Breaking with tradition, he promoted men based on merit rather than familial ties, offering advancement to anyone who proved their worth, even former enemies. This radical meritocracy drew the talented and ambitious to his banner, particularly those from less prestigious clans who saw an opportunity in his growing power and influence. Eventually, the relationship with his blood brother and ally, Jamuka, frayed. The two men represented competing models of leadership. His friend followed the traditional aristocratic approach, while Temüjin created a new system based on personal loyalty and merit. When their paths divided around the year 1182, their followers chose sides, initiating a prolonged struggle for supremacy. This conflict would last nearly 2 decades, punctuated by battles, betrayals, and shifting alliances, which gradually consolidated the Mongol tribes under Temüjin's banner. In 1186, his rival's supporters proclaimed him Gur Khan, an act that clarified the stakes. Only one man could ultimately rule the Mongol tribes. During this period, Temüjin displayed the strategic genius that would later reshape continents. After a significant defeat at the Battle of the 13 Sides, he retreated to reorganize rather than making a desperate stand. He systematically formed alliances with his opponent's enemies, including the powerful Kharit under their Khan, his father's old ally. When these relationships became strained, as they did with Togrul around 1203, Temüjin proved ruthless in eliminating former supporters who had become obstacles. By 1206, after decades of warfare, alliance building, and political maneuvering, he had achieved what no one before him had: the unification of all the Mongol and Turkic peoples of the steppes. In a great assembly called a Kurultai, held near the sacred mountain of Berkenkaldun, the gathered tribal chiefs raised him onto a felt carpet and proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, the supreme head of a unified Mongol nation. The man who had once been abandoned to starve on the steppes now stood as the undisputed sovereign of the largest confederation of nomadic peoples in history. His former blood brother, Jamukha, finally captured after years of conflict, refused Temüjin's offer of reconciliation, asking instead for a noble death without the shedding of blood. Honoring this request, the new Khan had him executed by breaking his back, a death worthy of a prince, and buried his remains with honor, a final respect for the man who had been both his greatest friend and his most dangerous rival. At the Kurultai, Genghis Khan immediately set about transforming this tribal confederation into a disciplined state. He instituted the Yassa, a legal code that established standard laws across all tribes. He created a decimal military system, organized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, overriding traditional tribal groupings. He established a rudimentary bureaucracy and a nucleus of messengers, the arrow bearers, who could rapidly transmit his command across the vast territories now under his control. Perhaps most significantly, he dismantled the old tribal aristocracy, replacing it with a new elite based on loyalty and service to him. The sons of defeated chiefs were executed or marginalized, while faithful followers, regardless of background, received positions of authority. He even created a personal guard unit, the Kashig, whose members would become his most trusted generals and administrators. By the age of 44, Genghis Khan had completed the first phase of his extraordinary journey from outcast to emperor. But he was not content to rule the Mongols alone. Standing before the gathered leaders at the Kurultai, he declared, "I have ascended from the brown earth to the golden throne. I intend to bring the whole world under my hoof." The assembled warriors, hardened by decades of intertribal warfare, now looked beyond the steppes toward the settled civilization surrounding them. The wealthy but fragmented Middle Kingdom of China to the south, the Muslim empires to the west, and even further away, the kingdoms of Europe. With a unified people behind him and a military machine honed through years of conflict, the Khan prepared to launch the greatest series of conquests the world had ever seen. The nomad had become emperor, and the world was about to discover the terrifying efficiency of the Mongol war machine. As Genghis Khan looked toward the horizon, the vast empires beyond the steppes had no idea of the storm that was brewing, a storm that would forever alter the course of human history. As the dust settled on the great Kurultai of 1206, Genghis Khan stood on the threshold of a new era. The unification of the Mongol tribes was not an end, but merely a beginning. With the steppes now united under his banner, the newly proclaimed Khan turned his gaze toward the sedentary civilizations that had for centuries looked down upon nomadic peoples as barbarians. Little did these kingdoms know that from the crucible of tribal warfare had emerged the most devastating military force the medieval world would ever encounter. The army that Genghis Khan unleashed upon the world was not simply a group of skilled warriors. It was a revolutionary military system designed for conquest on an unprecedented scale. Every aspect of this force was crafted through a combination of steppe traditions refined to perfection and innovations that would transform warfare forever. At its heart, the steppe military force was built around the mounted archer, perhaps the most formidable warrior of the pre-modern age. Born in the saddle, these children learned to ride before they could walk and began training with a bow from early childhood, becoming warriors who as adults could hit a target while galloping at full speed, release multiple arrows in rapid succession, and maneuver with a precision that infantry-focused armies could barely comprehend. The composite bow they wielded was a technological marvel, a laminated construction of wood, horn, and sinew that could outrange most contemporary weapons. With a draw weight exceeding 100 pounds, these archers could strike enemy formations with a 60-pound punch and an effective range of 300 yards or more, long before those enemies could respond. Each combatant carried 2 or 3 bows and up to 300 arrows of varying types, including specialized armor-piercing arrows for heavily armored opponents. Genghis Khan organized this lethal force into a decimal system that negated traditional tribal affiliations. Warriors were grouped into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This organization facilitated precise control and communication across vast distances and complex battlefields. Perhaps most crucially, he created a meritocracy where leadership was based on skill and loyalty rather than birth. A revolutionary concept that allowed the most talented fighters to rise through the ranks regardless of their origins. Discipline was absolute. The penalty for desertion, for failing to retrieve a fallen comrade, or for failing to properly share the loot was death. But this harsh discipline was balanced by generous rewards. These warriors received a greater share of plunder than soldiers in almost any contemporary army, creating intense loyalty and motivation. As one Persian chronicler observed, each man is worth more than 10 of their enemies because all profit when they win and all die when they lose. While the tactical brilliance of the steppe army was unparalleled, Genghis Khan understood that wars were won as much in the mind as on the battlefield. He elevated psychological warfare to an art form, using terror as a strategic weapon with chilling precision. Before attacking larger kingdoms, his forces systematically annihilated smaller settlements that resisted, sparing those that surrendered immediately. Survivors were often incorporated into his army as auxiliaries or sent ahead to spread tales of devastation, creating a wave of fear that preceded the main force. As word spread that entire cities had been razed and populations massacred, the next targets surrendered with little to no resistance. These conquerors cultivated their fearsome reputation with calculated public displays of brutality. After capturing the Tangut city of Wujai in 1209, they executed the defending general by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears, a gruesome spectacle designed not only as punishment, but as a message that would travel faster than any army. Yet this terror was applied with strategic restraint. Cities that surrendered without resistance were generally spared, and their skilled artisans and craftsmen were conscripted rather than killed. Their existing government structures were often left intact under the Khan's supervision. This insistence created a powerful incentive for submission rather than resistance, allowing his forces to absorb vast territories without having to fight for every inch. As one advisor reportedly told Genghis Khan, The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies and drive them before him. Ride their horses and take away their possessions. See the faces of those who were dear to them bathed in tears, and clasp their wives and daughters in his arms. What truly set the steppe military force apart from its contemporaries was its unparalleled operational mobility and flexibility. While other medieval armies typically moved at 10 to 12 miles per day, these riders could cover 60 to 100 miles when necessary. Each warrior maintained a string of 3 to 5 horses, rotating them regularly to prevent exhaustion. Without the need for slow supply trains, the Khan's armies could seemingly appear out of nowhere, striking before defenders could prepare. Rather than relying on static formations, these nomadic warriors mastered the art of fluid battlefield tactics. The signature maneuver was the feigned retreat, which lured enemy forces into a disorganized pursuit before turning around, encircling, and destroying them. In the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223, Russian forces pursued what they believed was a defeated detachment for 9 days, becoming stretched and vulnerable before the steppe warriors turned and annihilated them completely. Genghis Khan's generals were masters of encirclement, using carefully coordinated movements to surround enemy forces from multiple directions. In the Battle of Yuling in 1211, against the Jin dynasty, his forces split into 3 divisions and attacked from unexpected directions, trapping the numerically superior Jin army in a devastating encirclement. Unlike many contemporary powers, these nomadic conquerors proved remarkably adaptable to new challenges. When confronted by the obstacles of China's walled cities, the steppe warriors, who had little siege experience, quickly absorbed Chinese expertise. They recruited engineers from conquered territories and learned to build and operate catapults, trebuchets, and other siege engines, and developed innovative tactics such as diverting rivers to undermine city walls. This adaptability even extended to naval warfare, despite originating from a landlocked environment. Forces under Genghis Khan's successors would eventually build fleets to attack Japan and Java, although with less success than their land campaigns. The first sedentary civilization to face the full might of Genghis Khan's unified army was the sophisticated Buddhist kingdom of Western Xia, which controlled valuable trade routes between China and Central Asia. In 1205, shortly before the Kurultai that proclaimed him Genghis Khan, Temüjin began raiding Tangut territory, testing their defenses and response. The full invasion began in 1207 and revealed the pattern that would characterize many future campaigns. Initial resistance was met with overwhelming force. When the Tangut rejected the Khan's demands for submission and tribute, his forces systematically reduced their fortified cities, diverting rivers to flood defenses and employing Chinese siege engines against major fortifications. By 1210, the ruler of Western Xia submitted, accepting vassal status and providing troops for future campaigns. With his first conquest secured, Genghis Khan immediately turned his attention toward a much larger prize: the Jin dynasty ruling North China. The Jin campaign began in 1211 with a 3-pronged invasion that caught Jin defenses unprepared. Despite having a much larger population and resources at their disposal, including a standing army of over 1 million soldiers, the Jin proved unable to counter the mobility and tactical brilliance of the steppe warriors. At the Battle of Yuling, a Jin army of over 500,000 men faced about 100,000 of Genghis Khan's warriors. Through a series of feigned retreats and flanking maneuvers, the nomadic forces split the Jin armies and destroyed them, killing an estimated 60,000 Jin soldiers while sustaining minimal losses. Following this devastating victory, the Khan's troops systematically reduced Jin cities over the next few years. The Jin capital of Zhongdu fell in 1215 after a brutal siege. When the starving residents finally surrendered, the conquerors executed all officials and military officers before thoroughly looting the city. The streets were reported to be slick with the grease from the resulting massacre. While the final conquest of the Jin would await Genghis Khan's death, the empire had been fatally weakened by his campaigns. One of the most remarkable aspects of Genghis Khan's genius was his ability to coordinate military operations across multiple distant fronts simultaneously. Even while conducting the Jin campaign, he dispatched forces westward to subdue the Karakaitai Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia. These forces were led by his brilliant general, Jib the Arrow. The Khan's forces invaded Karakaitai territory in 1216. Rather than relying solely on military force, Jib exploited internal divisions, forming alliances with disgruntled vassal rulers and oppressed religious minorities under Karakaitai rule. This combination of military pressure and political manipulation led to the rapid collapse of the empire in 1218, adding vast territories to the growing domain of the steppe conquerors. The conquest of the Karakaitai had profound strategic implications. It extended Genghis Khan's control right up to the borders of the powerful Khwarezmian Empire, giving his realm control over the lucrative east-west trade that had flowed for centuries. Merchants who had previously paid taxes to multiple powers now operated under a single authority, foreshadowing the Pax Mongolica that would later link distant parts of Eurasia. Behind the dramatic battles and sieges lay perhaps the greatest military innovation of these nomadic conquerors, a logistical system far ahead of its time. While contemporary armies relied on slow supply, trains vulnerable to interdiction, the steppe forces lived off the land with remarkable efficiency. Each warrior carried dried meat paste, yogurt, and other preserved foods that could sustain him for days without resupply. They would drink blood from their horses' veins in an emergency, carefully making small incisions that would not permanently harm their most precious military asset. Their felt tents provided shelter in any weather, and their ability to travel with minimal equipment permitted operational speeds that baffled enemies. Gathering intelligence on enemies constituted another crucial element of the Khan's military success. Before major campaigns, Genghis Khan sent spies, merchants, and diplomatic missions to collect detailed information on potential targets. These reconnaissance efforts mapped terrain, identified key fortifications, assessed political divisions that could be exploited, and even cataloged the personalities of enemy leaders to predict their reactions during campaigns. His forces maintained a sophisticated communication system using horses, signal fires, and arrow bearers, who could transmit commands over vast distances at unprecedented speeds. This allowed Genghis Khan to coordinate multiple army groups separated by hundreds of miles, having them converge with timing that repeatedly caught enemies by surprise. The military brilliance of these conquests came at a staggering human cost. Contemporary chroniclers claimed that the campaigns in North China reduced the population by tens of millions. While modern historians consider these figures exaggerated, archaeological evidence confirms widespread abandonment of previously populated areas and a significant demographic decline. Beyond direct combat casualties, these invasions unleashed famine and disease as agricultural systems collapsed. Parts of North China's farmland reverted to pasture or forest as peasant populations were killed or fled. Similar patterns would later emerge in Central Asia and the Middle East, where sophisticated irrigation systems built over centuries fell into ruin. Despite the devastation, There was a cold strategic logic to this destruction. For Genghis Khan, depopulating regions converted them into pasture land for his horses, converting farmland back into grazing land that supported the nomadic lifestyle and military power of his people. As one scholar observed, in a very real sense, they were not conquering land, but harvesting it. By 1219, just 13 years after unifying the tribes, Genghis Khan ruled an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of the Islamic world. The Tangut had been subdued, the Jin dynasty was crumbling, and the Karakaitai had been absorbed into his growing realm. But the greatest challenges and most devastating campaigns were still ahead. As the Great Khan mustered his forces on the border of the Khwarezmian Empire, he sent a message to Shah Muhammad that revealed both his confidence and his worldview. I am the master of the lands of the rising sun, while you govern those of the setting sun. Let us conclude a firm treaty of friendship and peace. The Shah's response would ignite one of history's most devastating military campaigns. As the war machine prepared to descend upon the Islamic world with unprecedented fury, the nomads who had once been dismissed as barbarians by their civilized neighbors had proven themselves to be masters of large-scale warfare who would reshape continents. As you settle into sleep, consider how this military revolution, built on mounted archery, psychological warfare, and brilliant leadership, would continue to transform the world in ways that echo even today. In the year 1218, as Genghis Khan consolidated his power over the conquered lands of North China and Central Asia, his focus turned west toward a new horizon. The vast Khwarezmian Empire stretched before him, a mighty Muslim kingdom encompassing modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and much of Central Asia, ruled by Shah Muhammad II. It was a civilization at its apex, rich from controlling the Silk Road, defended by hundreds of thousands of warriors, and adorned with great cities that were jewels of Islamic culture and learning. What happened next would become one of the most consequential encounters in history, a collision between the nomadic war machine of the steppes and a consolidated Islamic empire that would forever alter the course of civilization in the Middle East. But unlike many of Genghis Khan's campaigns, this catastrophic war did not begin with territorial ambitions, but with a diplomatic incident that escalated into one of history's most devastating acts of revenge. Seeking to establish peaceful trade relations, Genghis Khan sent a caravan of 450 merchants into Khwarezmia in 1218. With them, he sent a message to Shah Muhammad: I am the lord of the lands of the rising sun, and you rule those of the setting sun. Let us make a firm treaty of friendship and peace. Initially, the Shah received this overture cautiously, but with apparent interest, sending gifts in return. Shortly thereafter, Genghis Khan sent a formal diplomatic mission led by Muslim envoys to reinforce his peaceful intentions. But in the Khwarezmian border city of Otrar, disaster struck. The governor, known as Inalchuk or Gayer Khan, accused the merchants of being spies, seized their valuable goods, and executed the entire caravan. When the subsequent diplomatic mission arrived to investigate, the Shah executed all but one of the ambassadors, whose beard they burned off, a profound insult in Mongol culture. Mongol ambassadors were sacred and inviolable. Their execution represented not just an insult, but a transgression against the order of heaven itself. Upon learning the news, Genghis Khan retreated alone to the top of the mountain for 3 days and 3 nights, communing with the eternal blue heaven before returning with cold purpose. According to Persian chroniclers, he declared, "The sovereignty of the urban population of these territories I will give to the youngest of my sons. But first I must reduce them to such a state that the hoofs of my horses may enjoy themselves in their palaces." The Mongol response would not be measured in anger, but in meticulous preparation. Throughout 1219, Genghis Khan assembled what may have been the largest nomadic army ever created, likely 200,000 warriors from all corners of his growing empire. The Great Khan took personal command, bringing his sons Joki, Chagatai, Ogidi, and Talibi to learn the arts of war and conquest. Against this force, Shah Muhammad could field a much larger army, perhaps 400,000 men. But instead of concentrating his superior numbers for decisive battles, the Shah made a fatal strategic choice. Fearing the Mongol reputation for mobile warfare, he dispersed his forces in garrison cities across his vast empire, allowing the invaders to defeat his army in detail. The invasion began in early 1220 with Mongol forces splitting into multiple columns to overwhelm the Shah's defenses. The city of Otrar, where the initial outrage occurred, fell after a months-long siege. True to his reputation, Genghis Khan reserved special punishment for Inalchuk, the governor responsible for the massacre of the merchants. The man was executed with molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a death that symbolized his greed. But Otrar's fall was only the beginning. The great cities of Transoxina, Bokhara, Samarkand, Urgench lay in the invaders' path, each a center of Islamic learning and culture, each defended by formidable walls and numerous soldiers. The fate of these cities would reveal the full, terrible efficiency of Mongol warfare. Bokhara, one of the most important cultural centers of the Islamic world, was the first major city to face the Mongol assault. The outer defenses fell rapidly in March of 1220. The garrison attempted a breakout, but was hunted down and massacred by the Mongol light cavalry. When the city surrendered, Genghis Khan rode his horse into the main mosque, declaring himself the scourge of God and commanding the city's notables to bring out their hidden treasures. After thoroughly sacking Bokhara, the Mongols employed a tactic they would repeat throughout the campaign. They used the city's population as human shields for the assault on their next target, Samarkand. Seeing their neighbors marched ahead of the Mongol army and forced to fill ditches with their bodies or charge the walls ahead of Mongol troops had a profound psychological impact on every subsequent city. Samarkand, with its massive walls and a garrison of 100,000 soldiers, was considered impregnable, but it fell within days when the city's Turkish mercenaries attempted to surrender separately. Genghis Khan had them executed, reinforcing his message that resistance and betrayal were equally futile. Approximately 30,000 skilled artisans from the city were deported to Mongolia to serve the growing empire, while many remaining inhabitants were massacred. As these great cities fell, Shah Muhammad fled westward rather than facing the invaders, a decision that demoralized his forces and the civilian populace. Relentlessly pursued by a special Mongol detachment led by Generals Jeeb and Subtai, the once powerful ruler was eventually tracked down to a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in isolation and despair in early 1221. The Shah's death did not slow the Mongol advance. If anything, the campaign became more methodical and devastating. The city of Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital, resisted fiercely, fighting street by street against the invaders. Enraged by this unexpected challenge, the Mongols diverted the Amu Darya River to flood the city. When it finally fell after a 6-month siege, the vengeance was terrible. Contemporary accounts claim that every Mongol warrior was assigned 24 civilians to personally execute. While such numbers are likely exaggerated, archaeological evidence confirms massive demographic decline. The great cultural centers of Eastern Persia met similar fates. Merv, Nishapur, and Herat cities renowned throughout the Islamic world for their libraries, observatories, and universities, were systematically destroyed in 1221, and the population ordered to evacuate and then methodically massacred in groups outside the city. After the city of Nishapur revolted and killed a Mongol general who was Genghis Khan's son-in-law, the punishment was particularly severe. The city was entirely leveled, with separate piles reportedly composed of men, women, and children, and even dogs and cats were slaughtered. The level of destruction inflicted on the Khwarezmian Empire was unprecedented, even by the harsh standards of medieval warfare. Historians estimate that the population of Persia may have declined by as much as 75% in the regions directly affected by the Mongol invasion. Sophisticated irrigation systems that had sustained Persian agriculture for centuries were destroyed, turning once fertile farmlands into desert. Cities that had been intellectual centers for hundreds of years were either abandoned completely or reduced to small towns. Persian chroniclers captured the psychological impact of this catastrophe in stark terms. One wrote, "They came, they destroyed, they burned, they killed, they plundered, and they departed." Another observed, "If a monster were to be generated by the world 1,000 years from now, it would still be less monstrous than Genghis Khan." The invasion was so traumatic that Persian historians referred to it as the disaster and viewed it as divine punishment for the sins of the Muslim world. Yet, amid this devastation, glimpses of the more constructive aspects of the future Mongol Empire emerged. Cities that surrendered without resistance, such as Balkh, were generally spared. Genghis Khan showed respect to Islamic religious leaders who approached him peacefully, ordering their religious buildings to be protected. And despite his fearsome reputation, he maintained absolute control over his forces, with looting and violence following precise strategic objectives rather than devolving into chaos. By 1222, most of the Persian campaign was complete. Rather than immediately appointing governors and establishing direct rule, Genghis Khan initially left much of the conquered territory devastated and ungoverned as he withdrew the bulk of his forces. Only gradually did Mongol administrators move in to begin rebuilding and governing, a process that would accelerate under his successors. As the main Mongol army returned east, a smaller force of about 20,000 warriors under the command of Generals Jebe and Subutai continued westward in what was conceived as a reconnaissance mission. This seemingly modest detachment would go on to defeat kingdoms in the Caucasus, annihilate a combined Russian army at the Battle of the Khalkha River, and raid the Crimea before rejoining the main Mongol force after a 5,500-mile circular campaign that demonstrated the extraordinary operational autonomy of the Mongol armies. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire marked a turning point in world history. It opened Central Asia and Persia to direct Mongol rule, created a power vacuum in the Islamic world that would not be fully resolved for generations, and forced refugees to flee in all directions, spreading stories of the invincible horsemen of the East. Among those who fled the Mongol advance was a young scholar who would later become known as Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, one of the greatest scientists in the medieval Islamic world. Initially kidnapped by the assassin sect, he would later serve the Mongols themselves, founding the famous Maraga Observatory under their patronage. A small example of how chaos and destruction eventually gave way to a new cultural synthesis. For Genghis Khan himself, the Khwarezmian campaign represented both the apex of his conquests and a demonstration of his strategic vision. Despite being over 60 years old, elderly by the standards of his time, he had personally led his armies in a campaign covering thousands of miles across some of Asia's most challenging terrain. He had destroyed one of the most powerful empires in the Islamic world in less than 2 years, and had sent an unequivocal message to all rulers who might oppose him: submission or annihilation. Upon his return from the Persian campaign, the Great Khan's focus turned once again to China, where unfinished business remained with both the Jin dynasty and Western Xia. But the template for Mongol conquest had been set: a combination of overwhelming military force, calculated terror, and political pragmatism that would drive his successors' successes as they further expanded the empire. The Khwarezmian campaign also revealed something fundamental about the nature of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. Unlike many conquerors who simply sought to rule existing states and extort tribute, the Mongols under his leadership were willing to radically transform the societies they conquered, destroying old power structures and rebuilding them in forms that served nomadic imperial interests. Cities could be sacrificed, if necessary populations could be relocated, and entire landscapes could be converted from agriculture back to pasture. This willingness to remake the world, to see conquest not just as occupation, but as transformation, helps explain both the extraordinary destructiveness of the Mongol invasions and their ultimate revolutionary impact on Eurasian civilization. When the survivors began to rebuild their shattered world, they did so in a new reality, one where the dynamics of power, trade, and culture had been fundamentally altered by the passage of the horse lords from the steppes. As you continue to drift off to sleep, imagine the aftermath of this great storm that swept over Persia. Picture the ruined cities slowly coming back to life, the tentative resumption of trade along the ancient Silk Road, now under Mongol protection. And consider how, even as the physical wounds began to heal, the psychological impact of the Mongol conquest would shape Persian literature, art, and historical consciousness for centuries to come. A testament to how completely Genghis Khan had fulfilled his terrible promise of revenge. But the story of Mongol conquest was far from complete. Even as Persia struggled to recover, the shadow of Mongol expansion was falling over new lands to the west, across the Russian principalities into Eastern Europe, and toward the heartland of medieval Christendom. The next great collision between the nomadic empire and the settled world would unfold on the plains of Russia and Hungary, as Genghis Khan's successors carried his vision of world conquest onto the European continent itself. Although Genghis Khan himself did not lead campaigns into Europe, he laid the groundwork for the invasion of the West. During his lifetime, the reconnaissance expedition of Generals Jeeb and Subutai, which had swept through the Caucasus and reached the Russian steppes, had returned with valuable intelligence about the lands beyond the western horizon. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine yourself in Eastern Europe in the year 1236, 14 years after Genghis Khan's death. While rumors of a terrifying army gathering to the east spread, the empire was ruled by Ogodai Khan, Genghis Khan's third son and chosen successor. Under his direction, expansion continued relentlessly. The campaign against Europe was entrusted to Bada Khan, the son of Joki and grandson of Genghis Khan, along with the brilliant General Subutai, who was now over 60 but still the masterful military strategist who had helped forge the empire. The force assembled for the European campaign was not the largest army ever fielded, but it was perhaps the most experienced and disciplined. It numbered approximately 130,000 warriors and included veterans from campaigns in Asia and the Middle East. Many of its commanders had been personally trained by Genghis Khan himself in the intricate tactics of steppe warfare. This was not simply a raiding force, but a full invasion force, tasked with bringing the European kingdoms under the rule of the Great Khan. The invasion of Europe began with an attack on the Volga Bulgars in 1236, quickly conquering this wealthy trading state that controlled vital river routes in the region. From there, forces split into multiple columns to systematically reduce the principalities of what would later become Russia. The once powerful Kievan Rus, a loose confederation of East Slavic principalities, was by this time already weakened by internal divisions. Prince after prince made the fatal mistake of engaging the invaders independently, rather than combining their forces. The great cities of the Rus fell one after another. Ryazan after a 5-day siege in December 1237, then Vladimir Suzdal and dozens of smaller settlements. Contemporary chroniclers wrote that no one remained to weep for the dead, as entire populations were massacred or dispersed into the forests. The northern city of Novgorod was spared only because the spring thaw turned the ground to mud, making cavalry advancement impossible. This general mud would prove one of the few reliable allies against the eastern invasion, as campaigns were usually timed according to the seasons to ensure solid ground for the horses. Kiev, the jewel of Russian cities, fell in December 1240 after a fierce siege. The attackers employed their full range of siege weaponry and techniques: catapults, mining operations, and psychological warfare. When the city finally fell, it was so completely destroyed that visitors in later years reported seeing huge piles of skulls and bones where the magnificent city once stood. The metropolitan of the Orthodox Church fled rather than submitting to the new rulers, a pattern that would be repeated across Eastern Europe. With the Rus principalities shattered, the advance continued westward at an alarming pace. By early 1241, the Eastern forces were ready to strike at the heart of Central Europe once more. They employed their hallmark strategy of coordinated multiple advances. One force under Batu Khan moved through Poland, while another under Subutai targeted Hungary. The timing was precise, with both armies intended to converge on the Hungarian plain, ideal terrain for steppe cavalry operations. The kingdoms of Europe, unlike China or the Islamic world, had no experience with nomadic armies of this sophistication. European heavy cavalry, the dominant military force of medieval Christendom, was trained to deliver powerful charges but lacked the mobility and adaptability of the steppe horse archers. European infantry, primarily peasant conscripts, were even less prepared for the speed and ferocity of the Eastern warriors. On April 9th, 1241, a Polish army supported by German Teutonic Knights met the northern force at Legnica. Leading the European forces was Duke Henry II of Silesia, who had gathered a formidable army of Polish, German, and Moravian troops. But like so many commanders before him, Henry was unprepared for the battle tactics he was about to face. The Battle of Legnica began with a disciplined Polish charge that initially repulsed the light cavalry. But this was a deliberate feigned retreat, one of the signature tactics of the steppe warriors. As the Polish knights pursued what they believed was a retreating enemy, they became exhausted and disorganized. Behind the Polish lines, the invaders employed a psychological weapon never before seen in Europe: smoke screens that created dense, disorienting clouds over the battlefield. When the Eastern forces suddenly turned and counterattacked, they caught the Polish knights in a perfect position for their composite bows. Heavy European armor provided some protection, but the attackers aimed for the knights' horses, dismounting these elite warriors and making them vulnerable. Once separated and immobilized, the warriors closed in with lances and sabers for the kill. The defeat was catastrophic. Duke Henry was killed, and his head was paraded on a spear before the walls of Legnica. So complete was the destruction of his army that the victors reportedly gathered 9 large sacks of ears from the fallen European warriors, a macabre counting system used to tally the casualties of their victories. Just 2 days after the Battle of Legnica, the main force under Subutai engaged the Hungarian army of King Bela IV at Mohi, near the Sejo River. The Hungarian kingdom was one of Europe's most powerful, and Bela had gathered a massive force of perhaps 80,000 men, the largest European army to confront the eastern threat. Subutai, demonstrating the tactical brilliance that had made him Genghis Khan's most trusted general, prepared an elaborate trap. Under the cover of night, he secretly constructed a boat bridge across the Sejo River, while launching a noisy diversionary attack at the main bridge. While Hungarian forces concentrated on defending the obvious crossing point, the steppe warriors streamed across the makeshift bridge and outflanked the European army. The Hungarians had established a defensive wagon fort, a circular lager where their forces could retreat and reorganize. But this defensive position became a deadly trap when the archers surrounded it, raining arrows down on the densely packed troops inside. When the Hungarians attempted to escape, they found that Subutai had deliberately left an apparent gap in the encirclement to the west, but it was merely a killing zone where hidden heavy cavalry waited to annihilate the fleeing troops. The Battle of Mohi was perhaps the most complete victory in Europe, and an estimated 70,000 Hungarians died, essentially destroying Hungary's military capacity in a single day. King Bela himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing toward a small fortress on the Adriatic Sea as pursuing detachments hunted him relentlessly across his devastated kingdom. In the wake of these double victories, the conquerors systematically occupied Hungary and launched raids into Austria, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Romania. Contemporary European sources described their advance with apocalyptic terror. They came swarming like locusts on the face of the land, bringing a terrible devastation to the eastern parts, laying them waste with fire and slaughter. By the end of 1241, the armies of the East had reached the gates of Vienna and the shores of the Adriatic. Scouts were rumored to have been sighted on the borders of the Holy Roman Empire, near the towns of Wiener Neustadt and Klosterneuburg. Europe seemed poised to fall to the same devastating conquest that had already swallowed up much of Asia. And then, in what is perhaps one of history's most consequential contingencies, the advance suddenly halted. On December 11th, 1241, the Great Khan Ogodei died in Mongolia. This necessitated the return of the princes and generals to the homeland for the Kurultai that would choose his successor. In the spring of 1242, Bada Khan ordered his forces to withdraw from Central Europe, retreating to the Russian steppes. This withdrawal has been the subject of historical debate for centuries. While Ogodei's death and the subsequent succession crisis certainly played a major role, some historians suggest that ecological factors might have been equally important. The Hungarian plain, though superficially similar to the steppe homeland, may not have provided adequate grazing for the massive horse herds that sustained the army. Each warrior needed up to 5 mounts for a campaign. Others have argued that strategic objectives had already been met, having destroyed the military capacity of Eastern Europe and established a clear demonstration of power. Whatever the combination of reasons, the sudden retreat gave Europe a reprieve that may have altered the course of world history. The Eastern conquerors would never again advance so deeply into Central Europe with comparable force, though the threat of their return would loom over European politics for generations. The campaigns in Europe had lasting consequences. In the East, most Russian principalities would remain under a rule known as the Mongol yoke, or the Golden Horde's dominance for more than 2 centuries. This long period of suzerainty would profoundly influence Russian political development, contributing to the centralization of power in Moscow and the emergence of autocratic governance that distinguished Russia from the traditions of Western Europe. Hungary never fully recovered from the devastation of the invasion. Before 1241, the Kingdom of Hungary had been one of the most powerful and populous states in Europe. Following the invasion, its population may have declined by as much as 25%, with entire regions left depopulated. Archaeological evidence shows abandoned villages and mass graves dating to this period. The demographic collapse created a power vacuum in Central Europe that would be filled by the nascent Habsburg Empire. For Western Europe, the invasion served as a distant but terrifying warning. Pope Gregory IX and his successor, Innocent IV, attempted to organize resistance, even sending emissaries to the Eastern Court to negotiate or convert the invaders to Christianity. These diplomatic missions, while failing in their immediate goals, opened the first sustained contact between Western Europe and the remote regions of Asia, bringing back valuable intelligence about the lands beyond the steppes. One of the most significant yet often overlooked consequences of the foray into Europe was biological. The armies, moving across the entire Eurasian landmass, serve as vectors for disease exchange. Some historians believe that the devastating Black Death, which would plague Europe the following century, originated in the conquered territories and moved along the trade routes they secured and expanded. Despite the withdrawal from Central Europe, the conquerors remained a powerful military force in Eastern Europe. Under Batu Khan and his successors, the Golden Horde established its capital at Sarai on the lower Volga River, controlling the vast territories of what is now Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Caucasus. From this base, they launched punitive raids into Poland, Lithuania, and the Balkans throughout the 13th and early 14th centuries. The Eastern threat profoundly altered European military thinking. The heavy cavalry charge, long the dominant battlefield tactic in medieval Europe, had proven woefully inadequate against the mobile steppe warfare. In subsequent generations, European armies would gradually adapt, developing more flexible tactics and incorporating more missile troops. Military reforms by rulers, such as Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, were directly influenced by the harsh lessons learned against the steppe warriors. Perhaps more fundamentally, the invasions broke the isolation of medieval Europe. Through the Pax Mongolica that followed these conquests, Europe would gain unprecedented access to the technologies, goods, and ideas of distant Asia. Marco Polo's famous journey to the court of Kublai would have been impossible without the relative stability and openness of governance across Eurasia. As you drift towards a deeper sleep, imagine the profound relief that must have swept across Europe when news spread that the Eastern armies were withdrawing in 1242. Church bells that had been silent rang out in cities and villages, and prayers of thanksgiving replaced, for a brief moment, desperate supplications for divine intervention. The peoples of Central Europe had caught a glimpse of what so many in Asia had already experienced: the overwhelming power of the Mongol war machine and the radical transformation that followed. Yet, even as Europe celebrated this unexpected deliverance, the great empire was entering its period of maximum expansion and prosperity. With the death of Ogodei Khan and the subsequent selection of Gayuk Khan as his successor, the empire continued to grow under the leadership of Genghis Khan's descendants. The devastation of conquest would gradually give way to the remarkable phenomenon known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, which would create the largest free trade and cultural exchange zone the pre-modern world had ever known. As the 13th century wore on, the vast empire stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe entered its golden age, a period of remarkable stability, prosperity, and cultural exchange known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. The violent storm of conquest that had reshaped much of the known world gradually gave way to an era of relative tranquility under the rule of Genghis Khan's successors. Following the death of Genghis Khan in 1241, a brief succession crisis ensued. After several years of regency under Genghis' widow, Temüjin, the Kurultai of 1246 chose Genghis' son, Genghis Khan, as the third Great Khan. His reign would last only 2 years before his death in 1248, which led to another succession struggle that eventually brought Monk Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, through his son Temüjin, to power in 1251. Under Monk's capable leadership, the empire reached its territorial peak. Military campaigns continued on multiple fronts. His brother Hulagu led forces into the Middle East, conquering Baghdad in 1258 and destroying the Abbasid Caliphate, while another brother, Kublai, pushed for the conquest of South China. Yet, increasingly, the focus shifted from pure conquest to the consolidation and administration of the vast territories already under imperial control. What emerged during this period was the most extensive system of free trade and cultural exchange the pre-modern world had ever seen. For the first time in history, one could travel from the shores of the Yellow Sea to the steppes of Hungary under the protection of a single authority. The famous Silk Road, which had operated intermittently for centuries, now functioned with unprecedented efficiency and security. Rest stations for caravans were established along major trade routes, providing food, shelter, fresh mounts, and protection for travelers. This new trade network was built upon an innovative infrastructure designed to facilitate movement over great distances. Imperial authorities established the Yam system, a network of postal stations set approximately a day's journey apart throughout the realm. Each station provided relays of fresh horses and lodging for official messengers and travelers authorized with a special peza, a tablet of authority issued by the Khan. A messenger could commandeer horses and supplies at any station, traveling up to 250 miles per day in urgent circumstances. This communication system unified territories separated by thousands of miles, allowing the rapid transmission of information and intelligence across the breadth of Eurasia. The stability of this system rested on the ruthless elimination of banditry and local warfare in imperial territories. Merchants who once faced peril at every political boundary now traveled under the protection of imperial law. According to contemporary accounts, it was said that a maiden carrying a gold nugget on her head could wander safely throughout the realm. While undoubtedly exaggerated, this description captures the remarkable security established over vast expanses that had previously been among the most dangerous trade routes in the world. Taxation was systematized, carefully replacing the arbitrary plunder of the conquest era. Census officials counted household livestock and agricultural output to establish regular tax obligations. While these taxes were often heavy, their predictability allowed trade and agriculture to recover from the devastation of the initial invasions in many regions. Tax exemptions were granted to religious institutions and to artisans practicing valuable crafts, encouraging the revival of cultural and economic life. Perhaps most remarkably, the empire practiced a level of religious tolerance unprecedented for the time. While the ruling elite initially followed traditional shamanic beliefs, they adopted a pragmatic approach to the diverse faiths of their subjects. Genghis Khan himself had declared, "I do not distinguish the merit of one religion over another. I respect all religions and favor none in particular." This policy continued under his successors, who exempted the clergy of all faiths, Buddhist monks, Muslim imams, Christian priests, and others, from taxation and conscription. This religious tolerance fostered intellectual exchange across previously impermeable boundaries. In the great cities under imperial rule, Karakorum, Samarkand, Tabriz, Beijing, scholars and clergy from across Asia met, often for the first time, debating and dialoguing. Discussions between these traditions flourished particularly in the imperial courts, where the Khans often staged formal discussion ceremonies between representatives of different faiths. The administrative structure of the empire at its height represented a remarkable fusion of nomadic traditions with bureaucratic systems borrowed from conquered civilizations. At the apex stood the Great Khan, whose authority derived from the mandate of heaven in the strictest steppe tradition. Below him, the empire was divided into four great khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia and the Western Steppes. Each Khanate maintained considerable autonomy while acknowledging the theoretical supremacy of the Great Khan. This flexible arrangement allowed for different administrative approaches suited to the diverse regions. In Yuan China, the dynasty adopted much of the pre-existing Confucian bureaucracy, governing through traditional institutions with imperial oversight. In the Islamic world, the Ilkhanate initially ruled through military governors, but gradually incorporated local elites and Islamic administrative practices into their governance. The court at Karakorum, the imperial capital founded by Ogodei Khan in Mongolia, became a microcosm of this multicultural empire. European visitors like William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar who visited in 1254, marveled at the diversity they encountered. He described a city where Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, and traditional shamanic storytellers all openly practiced their faith, where Chinese architects designed the great imperial palace, and where artisans from as far away as France created elaborate works for the Khan's pleasure. Within this palace lay perhaps the most famous example of cross-cultural technological exchange: the Silver Fountain, designed by Guillaume Boucher, a Parisian goldsmith captured during the Hungarian campaigns. This extraordinary device dispensed fermented mare's milk, rice wine, mead, and other beverages from silver spouts shaped like lions, entertaining guests at imperial banquets with its ingenuity. It symbolized the empire's ability to gather talent from across the world and put it in the service of central power. This period of relative peace allowed for unprecedented technological diffusion across Eurasia. Innovations that had previously remained isolated within specific cultural spheres now traveled rapidly along the imperial trade routes. Paper money, first developed in China, was adopted across the realm. Gunpowder, another Chinese invention, moved westward to revolutionize warfare in the Middle East and Europe. Printing techniques, astronomical instruments, mathematical concepts, and agricultural methods similarly spread across previously insurmountable cultural boundaries. The Great East-West exchange fostered by imperial rule permanently altered the trajectory of human civilization. Crops that would transform regional diets, such as rhubarb, lemons, carrots, and new varieties of grain, moved along the protected trade networks. Medical knowledge from the Islamic world reached China, while Chinese medical techniques traveled west. Even fashion was transformed, with designs and textile techniques from across Eurasia combining to create new styles. At the economic heart of this system was an innovation that would transform global trade: paper currency. Backed by the full authority of the empire, paper money, first introduced in China, was initially viewed with suspicion by merchants accustomed to metal coinage. Yet, the convenience of paper for large transactions, combined with severe punishments for counterfeiting or refusing to accept it, eventually ensured its use across much of the realm. Marco Polo, the famous Venetian traveler, marveled at this system, noting that the Great Khan had mastered the alchemy of turning the bark of the mulberry tree into money through the power of his seal. The trade networks established during this era extended far beyond the normal boundaries of imperial control. Trade goods from the empire reached as far as sub-Saharan Africa, Scandinavia, and Southeast Asia through secondary networks. Venetian and Genoese merchants established trading posts on the Black Sea to access these eastern trade routes, becoming intermediaries in a commerce that would eventually transform European economic life. Perhaps no figure better symbolizes the unique opportunities of this era than Marco Polo. His famous travels began in 1271, alongside his father and uncle, who were experienced merchants. The young Venetian crossed the breadth of Asia to reach the court of Kublai Khan in China. According to his account, he spent 17 years in imperial service, witnessing firsthand the diversity, wealth, and sophistication of the Eastern realm. While modern historians debate the accuracy of many elements in his narrative, the very possibility of such a journey testifies to the extraordinary interconnectedness of the medieval world under imperial protection. Despite all its successes, however, the Pax Mongolica contained inherent contradictions that would eventually contribute to its downfall. The success of the imperial system in facilitating movement over great distances created new vulnerabilities. Alongside merchants, diplomats, and ideas, diseases also traveled along the protected trade routes with unprecedented ease. The Black Death, likely originating in the steppes of Central Asia or China, would spread along these routes in the mid-14th century, ultimately killing perhaps a third of the European population and causing similar devastation across much of Asia. Another contradiction lay in the tension between nomadic traditions and sedentary rule. The original success of the imperial armies had rested on martial skills developed through the nomadic steppe lifestyle. Yet, as the ruling elite increasingly settled in cities, adopting the customs of conquered peoples and integrating into sedentary administrative systems, their military advantages gradually eroded. Future generations of imperial princes, raised in palaces rather than on horseback, would struggle to maintain the fierce discipline and toughness that had characterized their ancestors. Religious tensions also grew. Despite the official policy of tolerance, Hulagu's destruction of Baghdad and the execution of the last Abbasid caliph in 1258 created deep resentment among Muslim subjects. Even though the Ilkhans later converted to Islam, starting with Ghazan Khan in 1295, the wounds of the conquest era healed slowly. Similar tensions emerged in China, where the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan favored foreign administrators over native Chinese officials, creating resentment that would eventually contribute to the dynasty's fall. Political unity also proved difficult to maintain over such vast and diverse territories. The death of Meng Khan in 1259 sparked a civil war between his brothers Kublai and Arik Bok, essentially dividing the empire. Although Kublai emerged victorious, the subsequent decades saw the gradual fragmentation of imperial unity. By the end of the 13th century, the four major khanates functioned as essentially independent states, bound by family ties and cultural connections, but increasingly pursuing divergent policies. Even as political fragmentation accelerated, the trade and cultural networks established during the imperial era continued to function. The decline of central authority was a gradual process, not a sudden collapse. Trade routes remained active. Ideas continued to circulate across previously impermeable boundaries, and many administrative innovations outlived the empire's political disintegration. The legacy of this extraordinary period would endure long after the political structures that created it faded. The vision of Eurasian unity, first realized under imperial rule, would inspire subsequent conquerors, from Tamerlane to the Russian Tsars. The vast commercial networks established in this era would provide the foundations for the emerging global economy of the early modern period, and the unprecedented exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures would permanently alter the trajectory of human civilization, ending the isolation of regional knowledge systems and setting the stage for the scientific and commercial revolutions that would later transform the world. As you sink into deeper sleep, imagine being a traveler on the Silk Road during this extraordinary age. Picture the caravans of two-humped camels laden with spices, silk, and porcelain winding their way across the windswept expanses of Central Asia. Imagine the bustling markets of Samarkand and Bokhara, where merchants from India, China, Persia, and Europe haggled in a dozen languages. Consider the scholars in Baghdad and Tabriz poring over astronomical texts from China alongside medical treatises from Greece, synthesizing knowledge from distant traditions into new insights. This connected world, brutal and varied in its origins, but remarkably open in its mature form, represented a unique moment in human history when the barriers between civilizations temporarily fell. Although it eventually proved impossible to maintain the political unity of such vast territories across such diverse cultures, the dream of a connected Eurasia, first realized in this period, would continue to resonate through subsequent centuries. But even at the peak of its power and prosperity, signs of future challenges were emerging. The sons and grandsons of Genghis Khan, raised in palaces rather than on the steppes, began to lose the fierce qualities that had enabled the initial conquests. Disputes over succession became more common and more destructive, and in the diverse territories under imperial rule, new forces were gathering strength that would eventually challenge the authority of the Great Khan's descendants. The story now turns to the decline, the gradual fragmentation of the unified empire into separate khanates, the challenges they faced from internal rebellions and external enemies, and the eventual fading away of the world system initially established by Genghis Khan and his immediate successors. But this decline, like the rise that preceded it, would reshape the map of Eurasia and leave an indelible mark on human civilization. All great empires eventually faced decline, and the vast realm founded by Genghis Khan was no exception to this historical pattern. As you continue to drift into sleep, let us explore how the largest contiguous land empire in history gradually fragmented and dissolved, transforming from a unified global power into separate kingdoms with diverging fates. The seeds of division were planted even during the apex of imperial expansion. When Monk Khan died in 1259 during a campaign against the Southern Song dynasty in China, it was unclear who should succeed him. A succession struggle ensued between his brothers Kublai and Arik Bok, who both claimed the throne, initiating the first major civil war within the ruling family. Although Kublai eventually prevailed in 1264, this conflict radically changed the nature of imperial unity. Kublai Khan, having secured his position as Great Khan, made a momentous decision that symbolized a growing rift within the empire. He relocated the capital from Karakorum in the Mongol homeland to Khanbaliq, establishing the Yuan dynasty in China. While this strategic choice allowed him to better administer the wealthy Chinese territories, It alienated the traditional aristocracy, who viewed it as an abandonment of ancestral customs. Many nobles in the Mongol heartland refused to recognize Kublai's authority, considering him too Chinese, too influenced by Chinese culture and governance models. This ideological division between traditionalists who sought to preserve nomadic customs and pragmatists who adapted to sedentary civilization would repeatedly undermine imperial unity in the decades that followed. The empire had now effectively fragmented into 4 major khanates, each evolving along increasingly independent trajectories. The Yuan dynasty in China, under Kublai Khan, represented the most dramatic adaptation to sedentary civilization, ruling the world's most populous and sophisticated society. Kublai and his successors adopted many aspects of Chinese governance while maintaining their distinct identity as conquerors. They established a multi-ethnic administration that classified subjects in a hierarchy, with themselves at the top, followed by other Central Asian peoples, then Northern Chinese, and finally Southern Chinese. This system, though initially effective, created deep resentments among the native population that would eventually fuel rebellion. Despite these tensions, the Yuan period saw notable cultural and technological achievements. Drama and literature flourished during the era, producing classics such as the Romance of the Western Chamber. Mathematical innovations advanced under the guidance of scholars like Guoshojing, who reformed the calendar and improved irrigation systems. The famous blue and white porcelains, which would later become China's signature ceramic style, developed during this period, often incorporating designs from across the empire. But the Yuan rulers faced persistent challenges. Great floods along the Yellow River in the 1340s devastated the northern heartland, while paper money, initially a strength of the administration, underwent catastrophic inflation as successive Khans printed money to cover budget deficits. By the mid-14th century, widespread unrest manifested in movements like the Red Turban Rebels, a millenarian Buddhist sect that launched large-scale rebellions against Yuan authority. In Persia and the Middle East, the Ilkhanate followed a different evolutionary path. Initially established by Hulagu Khan after his devastating campaign against the Islamic world, this Khanate gradually integrated into the cultural sphere it had conquered. The defining moment came when Ghazan Khan, the Il Khan, converted to Islam in 1295, accelerating the process of assimilation. Under his rule and that of his successors, notably Al-Jitu and Abu Sa'di, Persian administrative systems were largely restored, and a cultural renaissance emerged during this period. This saw the construction of magnificent buildings, such as the splendid Islamic dome at Sultania, architecture that incorporated elements from across the realm. Persian historical writing flourished under scholars like Rashid al-Din, whose universal history represented the first attempt to compile a comprehensive account of world history, incorporating European, Chinese, Indian, and Middle Eastern sources, a work that would have been impossible without the unprecedented exchange of information facilitated by imperial rule. Despite these cultural successes, the Ilkhanates struggled with economic challenges and succession disputes. Following Abu Sa'di's death without an heir in 1335, the Khanate disintegrated into competing regional dynasties, effectively ending the direct rule of Genghis Khan's descendants in the region. Although local rulers would continue to claim a link to the imperial lineage to legitimize their authority. The Golden Horde, controlling Russia and the Western Steppes, maintained its nomadic character more successfully than the other Khanates, perhaps because its territories encompassed the vast grasslands suitable for the traditional pastoral lifestyle. From their capital at Sarai on the lower Volga, the Khans ruled a diverse realm that included Russian principalities, Finnic peoples, and various Turkic tribes. Under Berk Khan, who ruled from 1257 to 1266, the Golden Horde converted to Islam, culturally aligning itself with the Muslim world rather than the Buddhist and shamanic traditions increasingly prevalent in the eastern parts of the empire. This religious shift created a lasting division within the broader imperial sphere. The Golden Horde's relationship with its Russian subject states established patterns that would influence Russian political development for centuries. Russian princes were required to travel to Sarai to receive authorization to rule their territories, a practice that reinforced centralized authority even as it bred resentment. The preferential treatment granted to the princes of Moscow, particularly their authorization to collect tribute on the Khan's behalf, inadvertently strengthened what would eventually become the dominant Russian state. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, named after Genghis Khan's second son, experienced perhaps the most dramatic internal division. By the early 14th century, it had split into two distinct entities: the Western Chagatai Khanate, which gradually Islamized and embraced sedentary civilization, and Mogolistan in the east, which retained traditional nomadic customs and resisted Islamic influence. This division reflected broader tensions within the imperial tradition, the strain between ancestral steppe practices and the administrative necessities of governing agricultural societies. It also demonstrated how geography shaped divergent paths. Territories with extensive grasslands could sustain nomadic traditions, while regions dominated by farmland and cities required different governance approaches. Beyond these political divisions, several factors accelerated the empire's fragmentation. The first was ecological. The late 13th and early 14th centuries saw the onset of climate change, a cooling that would later be called the Little Ice Age. This climatic shift reduced grass production on the Eurasian steppes, compromising the pastoral economy that had sustained the original imperial expansion. Droughts and severe winters shrank the massive horse herds that had formed the basis of military power, gradually eroding the advantage the steppe warriors held over sedentary societies. Disease dealt another catastrophic blow. The unprecedented connectivity established during the Pax Mongolica had created ideal conditions for pandemic spread. The Black Death, likely originating in the Central Asian steppes, traveled rapidly along the trade routes in the 1340s, eventually killing between 30 and 50% of the population across much of Eurasia. In addition to its devastating human toll, this demographic collapse disrupted economic systems, particularly in China and the Middle East, further weakening imperial authority. Military factors also contributed to the empire's decline. As Mongol forces settled into administrative roles, they gradually lost the extraordinary martial skills that had made the initial conquest possible. The sons of the ruling elite, raised in palaces rather than on horseback, never developed the horsemanship, archery skills, and hardiness that had given their ancestors such an edge on the battlefield. Meanwhile, their opponents adapted, incorporating tactics and technologies into their own military systems. This military decline became apparent in a series of failed campaigns launched by the Yuan dynasty. Disastrous naval expeditions against Japan in 1274 and 1281 both ended in catastrophic failure when typhoons, the famous divine winds, or kamikaze, destroyed their fleets. Similar defeats occurred in Southeast Asia, where campaigns against Vietnam and Java met fierce resistance and unfamiliar territory. These failures damaged the aura of invincibility that had facilitated earlier conquests. Perhaps the most significant factor in the empire's fragmentation was the dilution of the ideological foundation established by Genghis Khan. His original vision had balanced traditional steppe values with remarkable pragmatism, incorporating useful elements from conquered civilizations while maintaining core nomadic virtues: loyalty, discipline, and meritocracy. As generations passed, this balanced approach gave way either to an excessive conservatism that rejected all outside influence in favor of rigid adherence to steppe traditions, or to over-assimilation, with rulers adopting the customs, religions, and governance models of the peoples they had conquered. Both extremes undermined the adaptable synthesis that had made the initial expansion so remarkably successful. The Yuan dynasty in China exemplifies the challenges arising from these contradictions. Kublai Khan attempted to govern China through a complex administrative system that balanced traditional Chinese bureaucracy with a multi-ethnic elite drawn from across the empire. This innovative approach satisfied neither the traditional Mongol nobility, who saw it as an abandonment of ancestral customs, nor the Chinese elite, who resented their subordinate status within the new hierarchy. By the 1340s, these tensions, combined with natural disasters, currency collapse, and eventually the devastation of the Black Death, created the conditions for a successful rebellion. Zhu Yuanzhang, a peasant of humble origins who had joined a Red Turban revolt, gradually consolidated the rebel forces. He marched on the Yuan capital in 1268, and the last Yuan emperor fled north to the Mongolian steppes, ending the dynasty's rule over China proper and establishing the native Ming dynasty, which would govern China for the next 3 centuries. The retreat from China did not end the imperial legacy in East Asia. The Yuan rulers established the Northern Yuan dynasty in the Mongolian homeland, maintaining their claims over China for generations and occasionally launching campaigns to reconquer lost territories. Meanwhile, their cousins in the Western Khanates continued to rule significant parts of Central Asia, Russia, and the Middle East, though with increasingly tenuous connections to one another. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the imperial decline was its unevenness. While political unity fragmented relatively quickly, the trade networks, cultural exchange, and technological diffusion established during the imperial era continued long after the central authority had faded. Caravans still moved along the Silk Road. Ideas continued to circulate across previously impermeable boundaries, and the dream of a Eurasian unity remained a powerful inspiration for subsequent conquerors. Even as the direct rule of Genghis Khan's descendants retreated, their impact remained visible in culture, language, and genetic patterns across Eurasia. Turkic languages spread widely, often replacing previous Indo-European languages in Central Asia. Cultural practices, from cuisine to clothing styles, showed clear evidence of cross-pollination. Genetic studies of modern populations have revealed the significant demographic impact of the imperial conquest and the population movements it facilitated. Research has identified a Y chromosome lineage present in an estimated 8% of males across a vast region of Asia, likely linked to the imperial expansions and the reproductive opportunities it created for the conquering elite. This means that today, an estimated 16 million men may carry genes directly descended from the ruling imperial clan, what researchers have called the Genghis Khan effect. The cultural and institutional legacies were equally enduring. Russian political development was profoundly shaped by centuries of interaction with the steppe powers, from governance practices to diplomatic protocols. Chinese administrative systems incorporated numerous innovations from the Yuan period, and across Central Asia, social structures still partly reflect the tribal reorganizations implemented under imperial rule. Even the geography of the modern world bears the imprint of this historical era. Many contemporary national borders in Central Asia roughly follow the divisions between imperial administrative units or successor khanates. The distribution of ethnic and linguistic groups across Eurasia still partly reflects the population movements of this period. In the modern Mongolian nation, though occupying only a fraction of the original imperial territory, retains cultural continuity with the homeland of Genghis Khan. Perhaps the deepest legacy lies in the realm of historical memory and national identity. For modern Mongols, the imperial period represents a golden age of world significance, a source of national pride and identity. In the contemporary world, streets, airports, and businesses in Ulaanbaatar carry Genghis Khan's name, and his image appears on everything from vodka bottles to hotels. In other regions once under imperial rule, historical memory is more complex and often contested. In Russia, the historical relationship with the Golden Horde remains a sensitive topic, interpreted alternately as a yoke that delayed Russian development or as a formative influence that shaped Russian distinctiveness. Official Chinese historiography has swung between viewing the Yuan dynasty as foreign oppressors or as legitimate rulers who contributed to Chinese historical development and territorial expansion. Central Asia's legacy is similarly multifaceted. Modern nations in the region trace complex lineages back to this period. The very name Kazakhstan preserves the memory of the Kipchak peoples of the steppes, who formed a major component of the Golden Horde. Yet, these national histories must also reckon with the devastation wrought by the original conquest, creating narratives that acknowledge both the destruction and the new synthesis that emerged. As the first light of dawn approaches in our narrative journey, we can reflect on the extraordinary historical arc we have traced. From the birth of a minor chief's son on the Mongolian steppes to the creation of the largest contiguous land empire in human history, followed by its gradual transformation and fading away. Few historical phenomena have so dramatically altered the course of human civilization or left such diverse and lasting legacies across such a vast portion of the globe. The disappearance of the Great Steppe Empire did not occur in a single catastrophic event, but through a gradual process of adaptation, absorption, and transformation. The conquerors were gradually conquered, and the rulers ultimately ruled again. And in this process, they permanently altered the societies they encountered, leaving an indelible mark on human history. As you sink into the deepest realms of sleep, imagine once more the endless horizons of the Mongolian plateau, where this extraordinary story began. Picture the felt tents against the vast sky, the horses grazing on the windswept grass, the simple origins of a force that would reshape the world. Consider how from such humble beginnings emerged an empire that, though politically extinct for centuries, continues to influence our world in countless subtle ways. From the genes we carry to the borders on our maps, from the languages we speak to the historical memories that shape national identities. The physical empire of Genghis Khan and his successors has vanished like mist from the past. Yet the connected world he helped create, transformed, disrupted, and forever altered by this extraordinary historical phenomenon remains our legacy. As you finally succumb to slumber, carry with you the echo of hoofbeats across the centuries, the rise and fall of the greatest land empire the world has ever known, and the enduring legacy of the man who started it all, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler whose vision briefly united the Eurasian world and permanently changed the course of human history.
you.